40? 40 going on. Okay, just so I know. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know which accent I should use now. Oh no, you do not want my local accent. It is very interesting, and I thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. There are enough questions and issues you raise to fill 3 days of conference, and all of them very valid and very worthy points. And I do hope that during the rest of today and in whatever meetings that you have, that you do have chance to consider some of those points raised and the effect they have on what you teach and what they have to say about our profession as a whole. Some very, very valid and some very, very interesting points. It was funny, when I first started coming to Russia, and in fact Krasnoярsk was one of the first cities I ever came, way back in 2001. Some of you very young then. Some of you may not even have been born. I don't know. But it was a thing about accents, just by quick way of introduction about how the world has changed. I come from the northwest of England, from Manchester. Some of you may have had the luck, not so much luck, to go and visit. Actually, it is a fairly reasonable city. London is not the only city in the UK. Some of you will be surprised to know that. If you look at Britain, people are empty, 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 London, empty, 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 empty. Is tend to have you read the map. Manchester has a very strong accent. I, because of my job, have kind of lost it. Not so much deliberately for this profession, but even in my university studies, I studied drama and English. And one of the first things they made us do, and I think it was a little cruel, was to record ourselves. And I still remember, because you have to remember in those days we weren't as used to seeing ourselves on videos and stuff like that. It was not a common occurrence. And I still remember going back in for the feedback. We had to do this thing, we just had to make some kind of speech or something. And I sat down and I listened to myself and my hard northern vowels. Manchester, very flat northern vowels. And I was just horrified at the sound of it. But that's a personal thing, and it's a snobbish thing, I'll be honest. As I travel, when I go back home at Christmas, for example, because I don't live in the UK, but when I go back home at Christmas, I'm on an aeroplane full of people from Manchester trying to sound sophisticated. It doesn't work in a Manchester accent. But when I first came here, I still had some hangovers of Mancunian, and I used the word etc. quite a lot. But in Manchester, because in many local accents, we tend to go for what is easier to articulate. This is why learners like American English a lot. Because in American we don't have the T's quite so much coming out, etc. But anyway, and I used to go into kind of the Mancunian, it kind of comes out as etc. rather than et. Because the k is much easier to articulate than the t. Etc. is a bit, whereas etc. is like, oh, that's close enough. And I do remember that one of my colleagues at the time came up to me very politely after a presentation I'd been doing in Russia. And he said, "Ooh, Steve, could you just be a little careful with your pronunciation?" Why? He said, because the teachers have noticed that you tend to pronounce it etc. and they think it should be etc. So, Russian teachers of English, you will be pleased to know that you have made me speak my own language slightly better. But it does go a long way to demonstrating what you were so admirably talking about this morning, that doesn't happen so much anymore. And a quick other point of comparison, then, because it's very relevant to what I want to talk about. One of the other things I used to get asked after seminars and presentations, people would run up to me and they go, "Oh, Steve, can I ask you?" when we're writing a formal letter, where does the address go? And I'm thinking, who cares? But you can't do that. You have to be authoritative. And I want to say, but who sends formal letters? Nobody sends them. People send email, and on email, nobody writes. Or you use a letter heading that the company has for its email, and it's already done for you. The things people worry about. But it has changed, it has moved on, and it is a wonderful, it is a fascinating time to be teaching language in so many ways, because there are languages going through a massively accelerated change. We have moved a long way from teaching English from its original methodology, which many of you will know. The original methodology of teaching English was very much based on teaching Latin. And many of the weirdnesses, and I just made that word up, about teaching English, and many of the things that we found irritating or possibly boring, but some people still kind of hold on to, especially as regards grammar, came from the idea that you could somehow take classical Latin grammar and the rules and impose those on English. Of course, the difference being, and again, the point was well made, that Latin is a dead language. Latin is no longer developing. When are you going to use your Latin? I have Latin A-level, by the way. Yes, I know, I think I must have been, I don't know, on medication or something when I agreed to it. But certainly, I don't really use it that often, except when I'm trying to interpret Portuguese or Spanish or something like this. But English and Russian are living languages, they're dynamic languages, they're developing language. Any attempt, I believe, personal belief, any attempt to try and put language in a box and say to your learners, well, here's English, enjoy it, next week we'll do German. Any attempt to do that is futile completely. What we need to be doing as 21st century teachers is saying, well, this is kind of where we are now, but open our learners' minds to the possibility that language will change and give them the tools they need to be able, again, to accommodate, to adapt to those changes and use the resources they have available to them to help them in that task. Okay, so let me get down to some of the things I wanted to talk about. Don't worry, I have not gone off track, but I am standing right in front of the presentation. So I'll move politely to one side. So I just block these ladies' views. Okay, so one of the changes in language education, hello, there we go. One of the changes in language education, apart from the kind of linguistic issues that we're facing, is also, again, the point was made, the purpose of language education, and in some respects, the purpose of education in general. There has been a move over the last years to try and marry in the world of education and the world of life after education, in more than just an academic sense. Looking at the fact that our learners are moving into a world where things are very, very different, but part of the job of a school is to prepare them, not, I repeat, to just turn out workers, that's not what it's about, but it is to prepare learners for the world into which they will move so that they can be successful, they can contribute to society, and through being able to operate within that society, have a happy and fulfilling life. Yes, hopefully make some money along the way, but also to be able to exist in that world and to use what it has to offer. So please, when I talk about things like career opportunities, it's not just about providing a workforce. It is the fact that most of us spend most of our adult lives in a job. So it'd be kind of nice if it was a job we liked, we were good at, and could earn some money for. Or win the lottery. I don't know. That would be lovely. Of course, no denying this, internet has changed the way everything works, and it is changing constantly increasing rate. I mean, it's a parabolic thing. You don't get a straight line in terms of development, in terms of progress. It's a sharp curve, and it's going up all the time. Many of us in this room did whole university degrees without even a single computer. There are people in this room, I'm sure there are colleagues who've done masters and doctorates, etc., where we had to do old-fashioned things like go to the library. Oh yes. No such concept as copy-paste. I watched some young ex-students, friends, kind of going through universities and these days, and they were putting together, not exactly a thesis, but they were putting together a written assignment. It was all copy-paste. The Greeks have a lovely play on words. The Greek word for to steal is klevo. The noun is klopi, theft. So the Greeks play on words between klopi and copy. And they call it klopi-paste. So I steal it and I paste it. Do klopi-paste. Oh, I do speak Greek, by the way. I'm not one of those English people that doesn't speak other languages, so I just want to put that out there. Sadly, not a language that's much use to me today. Anyway, it is when I go home, especially talking to my dog. My dog speaks Greek. If I tell him to sit in English, he just looks at me. If I tell him to sit in Greek, he just looks at me, and then I say it again, and then he sits down, because he's asserting himself. Anyway, enough of my dog. Talk maybe more about that later today. The internet certainly has changed the way we do things, and there is... Colleagues kind of have different opinions about the internet. Parents have different opinions about the internet. But the fact of the matter is, quite simply, we can't put our heads in the sand. You cannot pretend the internet is going to go away. It ain't. And at the end of this presentation, I'll make a quick point about the internet that I think is very, very important. Not just about using it, but helping our learners navigate it in safety. I want to make a point about that as we go through. But certainly, we're going to come back to this on a number of occasions as we go through. As was mentioned, lingua franca, I'm not going to dwell on it anymore, because it's already been admirably covered. But obviously, just to remind you that 74% of all English conversations worldwide are non-native to non-native. And that's a very big number, on top of the facts and figures that were already presented. This idea that English has moved away from being tied to Britain or the States. It's cut those ropes a long time ago, and is now being used as a default language around the world, as you well know, which has made many of the changes that have already been discussed this morning. I'll refer to a couple more as I go through. But certainly in terms of the world of work and providing our learners with skills they need to be able to move, for example, into the workforce, English has become a very, very important tool. It does speak to issues like motivation. You know, the issue of motivating students, especially teenagers, can be sometimes quite difficult. The psychologists have this thing they called avoidance of future regret. It's a very strong motivator to avoid doing something that you might regret a little later on. It's called avoidance of future regret. So when your students maybe say, why should I learn English? One thing you can say is, look, imagine a couple of years down the line, you have a job, and your boss says, okay, we've got this new contract with another country. It doesn't have to be in the UK, somewhere that's non-Russian speaking. And I need someone who can handle this contract, but they're going to have to be able to do it in English because all the communication is going to be in English. How are you going to feel when you tell your boss that you can't do that? Or worse, tell your wife or your husband you're not going to get the promotion because you don't have the language skills that will enable you to handle that side of the business. Part of my job, I work every day with people who are using English as a second language, as a foreign language, our partners around the world. And many of my colleagues, don't imagine for a second, many of my colleagues who work in express offices are also using English as a foreign or a second language. We are all working in this medium, and some of them do it better than others. but everybody's using it. It's a very important point. Globalization. Employers seek new skills to increase competitiveness. The purpose of education is broader than just specific subjects anymore. So yes, we hear language teachers, and again, I'm very happy to hear that not everybody's an English teacher. We've got German and French going on today, which is brilliant. But it's more than just that. It's more than maths, it's more than biology, it's more than history. Education is about preparing the individual as an identity, as an existence to move into society. And employers are also, following on from that, employers are looking for people who can move into their environment and offer and collaborate and work within the structure that's already there and move it forward. The majority of companies opening now tend to be smaller ones, innovative ones that are filling niche markets. The new entrepreneurs are not building big factories. Many of them are working from quite small offices where they don't have direct contact with their customers but work online a lot. This is the new workplace. Our learners need to be able to move into it with all of their skills. So if we're looking at kind of specialization for 24, what do we mean? Because I've been speaking very generally at the moment. Certainly, increasingly there is call for tailored and specialized instruction. That learners, especially regarding things like English, there's been a rise in English for specific purposes, which I'll be talking about a little later this afternoon. This afternoon. We'll be looking at that in a little more detail. You mentioned taxi drivers, for example. We also, from our side, one of the first books we made for ESP was for beauty salons. Because in touristic areas, if you can, talk to somebody about their hair or whatever in English, it's money in the pocket. There was research done which directly tied in knowledge of foreign languages to increased income. And there are many people coming back to language, people who didn't have the opportunity to learn language at school, who are now coming back. But they don't want to learn the whole of English. They want to learn the English they need for what they are doing. It's a big call for that, and it's a big shift in the market generally. Some of you who work in private institutions may have noticed that people are coming in for that kind of language. We'll talk about this for the remainder of the talk, about 20 minutes I have left. Cultural awareness has already been mentioned. This is a big thing. In fact, I'll talk about that in the main body now we're coming into. And this idea of lifelong learning. We mentioned already, there are so many tools that learners have available to them now outside of the classroom. The concordances, the online dictionaries, the synonym dictionaries, all of these things, which even I use. I love the online thesaurus. If I'm stuck for a word and I'm writing something, I don't want that word. You go online, in 3 seconds you've got 50 options. Oh, that's the one. Learners have those choices. They have the possibility to learn without us. Yeah, not as well as with us, of course, obviously. But they do have that, and this is one of the tools we need to give them as part of the 21st century learning experience. The opportunity to learn, I think the word they use these days is asynchronous learning. Learning at different times, at different paces, in different places. There's a poem. So that our learners can use the skills available to them for that. Just a quick word about technology, because it's already been mentioned, but I did want to... some days it would be nice. Students being quiet and doing what they're told. Wouldn't that be nice sometimes? What is interesting about the world of technology in the classroom is just very quickly a couple of things. Is I have come across quite a bit of teachers' guilt about technology in the classroom. The teachers feel, some of them, very guilty that they're not using it enough. there are issues. However, I would say the following, that if we're going to use technology in a classroom, that we should have a good reason for doing so. As a company, the company I work for, we have invested heavily in digital tools, online resources for learners, and we will continue to do so. But before we use it in our class, before we feel guilty about not having our classes full of tablets, for example, we should ask ourselves, will this technology help me do something I couldn't do before? Help me do something better, or help me do something faster? If yes, fine. If not, then I probably don't need to use it. So don't feel 100% guilty if they're not on tablets all the time. Feel guilty if they're not doing it because you don't feel comfortable with it. But it still should add, what I call, it should pass the test of added educational value. We use technology if it will help us do something better, faster, or something we couldn't do. Sometimes we don't need it. Sometimes it's just enough to chat with the teacher. Sometimes it is just enough to read an article and then discuss it linguistically and in terms of its content. So look at technology not with suspicion, but with the same kind of critical eye you would look at a course book or anything else you bring into your classroom. So just think about it in that sense. And also we do have to be aware, before people start feeling too guilty, that not all schools are yet fully equipped to be able to use technology. Now, I don't know the institutions in which you ladies and gentlemen work, so it's not about you in particular. But there is still a massive digital divide, not just between countries, but between regions or between major cities and cities outside in the outlying regions, where money isn't always equally distributed. There are schools where, I know I have been to schools, I'm not talking just Russia now, I'm talking in my experience in general. A few years ago we started bringing out interactive whiteboard software. Something we invested very heavily in and we're very happy with. But I went to schools in some countries where there wasn't not just a whiteboard, they were still using blackboards and chalk. You can't go into those schools and promote interactive whiteboards. It's just an insult. But you know what? Those schools were still turning out very good students of English. There is still a digital divide. We're not there yet. Some schools don't have internet. Some schools have massive amounts of internet. Some schools kind of have internet, but if someone opens the wrong door, someone down the corridor loses their internet. Or you get the smart students using up all the bandwidth to download the latest season of Game of Thrones. But it's still out there. It's still not 100%. We don't know what we're doing with it yet. I think the best thing for you to do is to say, what can I do? What is feasible in my environment? And what would it help me do better? These are the questions we should be asking, and then do the best we can, because that's what teachers have always done. We've done the best we can. And that, I don't think, does change. In terms of preparing learners for the 21st century, I just want to mention some points. This will be kind of highlighted, because I've got about 15 minutes maximum. Thinking about how we can tune into the 21st century skills that our learners need. These are the ones most commonly mentioned. I just want to make a few points about them now as we go through. When we talk about 21st century skills, this is a very interesting report that I read. It is not about a complete change in the curriculum. Teaching 21st century skills, providing learners the specialization, the skills that they need to move into the modern world, is really a question of emphasis. And this was the point made in this report, that you don't need to throw out your old educational system. What you need to do is take certain things that are being done already and just do them a bit more and a bit more deliberately. And this is what this quote is about. Skills that are novel, they're not. Communication, collaboration, critical thinking, creativity are not new. What we're being asked to do is just to teach them more intentionally and effectively. So we're not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater. But as teachers in the 21st century, we may just want to change our emphasis from hours of endless grammar analysis, for example, as much fun as that was, to more emphasis on contextualization, more emphasis on practical use of the language, more emphasis on getting my meaning across to somebody else. So it's all about emphasis at the end of the day. Other skills within the 21st century skills, we'll be talking very quickly about the 4 of them. Interestingly, you can see these are called soft skills. Blah, 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 communication, blah, 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 teamwork, blah, 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 etc. Isn't it, by the way, an interesting 21st century thing? Some of you are writing notes, some of you are photographing the screen. Interesting. And I wonder which ones will actually be looked at again. Whenever I talk to students, because I sometimes get asked to go in and talk to students, usually students studying English, whenever I change a slide, you get this thing where everyone just picks up their iPad. And you just look out at the class and all you can see are the back of people's iPads as they're shooting the screen. By the way, they're all iPads. Wish their parents would adopt me. Because when I was at university, money for things like iPads, even if there had been iPads, which there weren't, would have been a little hard to come by. But anyway, these soft skills, what are they about? These are skills learners need to develop in order to progress in their career. These are skills which are considered, I think the number is just over 70% of progress in a person's career are down to these skills. Soft, not hard. Hard skills would be qualifications. Okay? These are what decide how well you do in your life. Do you know when they discovered these? This research is from 1918 in the States, Harvard University, Carnegie Institute, and Stanford. They looked at what helped people move forward in their career in 1918, and these were the skills that they came up with. Only now are we really starting to take these on board and say, okay, your hard qualifications get you in the door, it's this that will keep you there and will allow you to move forward. So again, it's broader than just language learning. Interesting fact there. So very quickly, if we're thinking about the 21st century skills our learners need to develop from the point of language teachers, which are they and how can we do it? Collaboration. Collaboration, a very important part of the 21st century skill set. Our learners need to be able to collaborate with people quite literally all over the world. And this is where this idea of English as lingua franca, whereas global English comes into play. And along with that, cultural sensitivity. If I am going to be able to communicate with people around the world, I have to have some idea of the culture in which they exist. So, for example, when I'm writing to someone in the Middle East, it is usual to preface their name with Mr. or Miss. I'm always referred to as Mr. Steve. And I would write back to Ms. Nashwa or whoever I happen to be writing to. Because it's much more formal there and much more required to have that before their first name, which is unusual in native English. In native English, we don't put Mr. or Miss and then the first name. You're either on first name terms or Mr. or Miss surname. But increasingly, and this is an interesting change, the idea of putting Mr. or Miss before first name is a non-native English use in English. And it's quite interesting in the way that works. So learners need not just to learn language, but to be sensitive to the recipients of that language. They need to think about where they'll be communicating, via email, via Skype, via a blog, via WhatsApp, or Viber. All of those things are areas in which learners communicate. In the classroom, we tend to explore it through cooperative learning activities. We get learners to do projects together. We get learners to do cooperative learning in the classroom. We can help them develop those skills. But remember what I said about focus? When we're doing things like cooperative learning tasks in the classroom, we don't just focus on the language. We focus on helping them develop the people skills, the soft skills, to be able to do that. So conflict resolution, turn-taking, listening to other people's ideas, which are never as good as mine, obviously, but I have to listen to them because it's polite. Negotiation, persuasion, all of these skills are skills learners need to learn. So not just the English in such a situation. You see things like this, yeah? Project work. So when you're working on project, don't worry too much about, I just wanted to have something there to show you. When you're looking at things like project work, think about the social skills involved as well. Be there with them, help them with that. These are skills that they will be able to transfer, not just linguistically, but to their later lives. I'm not going to show you all the examples, we don't have time for that. Brainstorming, a great skill to pick up. Steve, me, very, very keen on brainstorming. Brainstorming, definition there. Getting learners to come up with ideas quickly, to think on their feet, is a very important part. And I put it under collaboration because brainstorming is a conference, as it says here, a conference technique. So when we're writing our compositions, for example, instead of just saying, okay, your homework for next week is to write a composition on how brilliant Steve is. No, you never do that. Everybody agrees. Do not think like that. The advantages and disadvantages of whatever it may happen to be, brainstorm it first. Encourage learners to come up with ideas. Encourage them, create an atmosphere in which it's okay just to come up with something and put it out there. Not to try and judge myself, not to second guess, but just go, well, what about this? Okay, that's interesting. Let's see how that works. Now, it may work, it may not work, but I'm training my learners to come up with ideas. That, again, is a skill that will that will be useful for them in later life. I should be done in about 5 minutes, ladies, okay? So that'll be my 40 minutes. I'll be done. Communication. Hello, language teachers. Communication is not, these days, as was pointed out, just a matter of getting the grammar correct. Communication is saying the right thing, at the right time, in the right place, to the right people. It's getting a whole bunch of things right, many of which have nothing to do with grammar, a lot of which maybe don't have anything to do with pronunciation or syntax. It's getting the right phrase at the right time, in the right cultural context as well. It's knowing how to function in your language. Also remembering that we do not just communicate by speech, formal letter. We communicate through our Facebook accounts. We communicate through company websites. We communicate through, some people have blogs. We communicate through a whole variety of ways. If you're sending a WhatsApp, dear John, I hope my WhatsApp message finds you well. We were wondering this evening if you'd care to accompany us to the cinema, because we wish to see one of the latest movies there, full stop. We would love to have you join us. Please do feel free to bring your lovely girlfriend. We shall be meeting at around 7 o'clock, if that is convenient. Dearest regards to your wonderful mother, Steve. For a WhatsApp, completely inappropriate. Completely appropriate on most levels, but completely inappropriate for WhatsApp. Learners have to move between different styles of communication. And in each case, what makes them work, what is appropriate, what is not. Not good or bad. This is not about judgment. This is about using the right communication tool at the right time. These are things they have to learn and we have to work with. In all cases, they still have to get some old-fashioned things right. They have to decide which communicative medium is best for their purpose. And now they have more choice. Dear John, just wanted to tell you, your dog's dead. What's up? No. That would be a phone call. Yeah. Deciding which medium is the right one for the right thing, learners still have to get that right. They still have to be coherent. They have to make themselves understood. They have to get from A to B to C to D in a way that the other person could understand. It's just sometimes we do it in a short way, sometimes in a long way. They have to be clear. Absolutely agree that certain things are so flexible these days. But clarity still matters. And if I can't be clear, make it simple. You know, if you're worried about not being clear, just make it simple. Make it simple, stupid. Being correct. Correctness does matter to a certain extent because it can get confusing if you're not. So a certain amount of grammatical competence still matters. If we don't get the word order right, who's doing what to whom becomes an issue. That could be a little confusing. Yeah, getting the right part of speech in some occasions is still very important. Not tablets of stone, not that we can't make mistakes, but the basic structure should still be there. That still matters. People still get confused by it. And style still matters. If I work for a company and I'm sending an email, I've got to remember how to send it. If I'm sending a WhatsApp, got to know how to send it. Style is as important as it ever was. In this world into which we're moving. The last 2 points are very quick. Students need to be creative. This comes back to brainstorming. Employers will pay for people who can be creative. Creative is not just about the arts. Creative is coming up with an idea, coming up with a solution, getting things done, getting it done quickly. Thinking on our feet is something learners need to be able to learn to do. Because these days, everything moves faster. Everything goes quickly. In the old days, you wrote a letter of complaint, dear company, your company is horrendous. Take it to the post office, goes to the company, somebody has to read it, somebody has to answer it. 1 week later, 10 days, you get an answer. These days, you send an email to a company, dear Steve, your company is absolutely awful. What are you going to do about it? Love, Mum. Off goes the email. If you haven't replied by the following morning, dear Steve, yesterday I wrote a letter of complaint about your company. Today I'm writing to complain that my complaint has not been answered. And then you need a complaint to answer first. But people got to think faster. People don't wait anymore. Learners have to learn to think on their feet. In terms of education, of course, Bloom's Taxonomy Level 6, creativity. Creating things, coming up with new solutions. Being creative keeps learning in our head. Being creative gets us engaged with the language. But it cannot happen if we have not got firm foundations in the language. Okay? So first give a firm foundation and then move forward. So things like grammar still do matter, just not only grammar is the point. And my final point, critical thinking. Critical thinking, if there were more critical thinking, I think the world would be a happier place right now. I could stop there, but I won't. It's one thing I wanted to show you. Critical thinking is connected to creativity. The last point I wanted to make, though, is about the internet, which is where I started. Just have a quick look at that. You got there. Ladies and gentlemen, the point is the internet is a wonderful resource. 21st century learners must know how to use the internet. End of story. But they must do so with a healthy skepticism. There is no control about what goes on the internet, nor, in my belief, should there be. But that means that learners must be prepared. Some people deliberately put bad information. Some people with the best intentions put bad information by mistake. What are your sources? Where does it come from? Who is telling me this? Is there an agenda? Is there an opposing point of view? Does this reflect what I kind of already know, or is this completely different? And for the last thing, don't think you are immune to this. This was found on Facebook from friends of mine. friends of mine who have university degrees, friends of mine who can handle sharp implements. Basically says that if you don't put this on your Facebook account, Facebook are going to let all your photographs be public. All the pictures of you at parties and on the beach and things. And people posted it. Until I said, why? It's rubbish. It's not even a thing. Well, they go, better safe than sorry. I go, no, better right than wrong. None of this is even slightly legal. None of it. The Rome Statute sets up the International Criminal Court. Nothing to do with photographs of you looking 3 or 4 kilos overweight. The camera adds them. So please, if we as adults can't be bothered to double check our facts, what about our kids who are going to live this far more than we do? We have to teach them healthy skepticism, to use the internet, but use it with this fully engaged. And this, I think, is the heart of everything in the 21st century. It's using this. Computers are wonderful things, internet is a great thing, but the brain is still the most sophisticated form of computer there is. Sometimes our learners lose the instruction manual. Luckily, there's always YouTube, I guess, to tell us how to use it, so it's fine. I thank you very much for your attention. I shall be seeing some of you later on. If I don't, have a great conference, have a great day, enjoy all the things you can discuss and learn, and I shall see you later. Thank you very much indeed.